Hi, Robert.
It's connecting.
It's connecting to audio. We can't hear you just yet. I can see you moving your lips.
There it goes.
All right, Bobby, you can hear us? You're in mute.
I got it.
There you
There
go.
Bingo.
Thank you, Robert.
I am computer illiterate, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Perfect timing.
Join the rest of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Morning.
Good
Good
morning,
morning.
Rob. We're going to kick the meeting off here shortly, and then we'll get going. Thank you for joining us. Good. All right. We are live. It is 9:04, Friday, March 1st. The Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order, acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified of this meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Today, we have Robert Alton, Dare County Manager, attorney from Outer Banks, joining us. I know our staff has had a conversation with him. Desiree, you want to open us up and introduce Robert?
Sure. Good morning, Robert, and thank you for making time for us this morning. Mr. Outen has been the county manager and county attorney. He serves a dual role for Dare County since 2009, and he oversees the Outer Banks Shoreline Management Program. We have heard a lot about the way that Dare County structures their beach restoration projects, their beach renourishment projects, and it's really seen as a model of a good model to follow when you're not only talking about how to fund these projects, but how to organize them in a way that really become an efficient and effective program for a community that really lives because of the beach. and beach nourishment is a really big important thing for them as it is for us. So I thought it would be a very good exercise to hear from them about how they structure those projects, how they fund those projects, and really what similarities we may see in the way they do it that we could probably replicate as part of our efforts here. So Robert, if you want to go ahead and just give us a very high-level overview of the management program, what you have in the queue, and specifically the financial piece of how you've been able to leverage resources to maintain a consistent nourishment program for Dare County.
All right, so we'll go back. My name's Bobby. You can call me Bobby. I don't go by Robert very often, unless my mother calls me. But I've been the county attorney since 2000 and came on board as the manager and the attorney in 2009. So I've been involved with Dare County for 20 some years, and we've been working on beach nourishment for longer than that. And we acknowledged the need for a nourishment program in the late 80s and early 90s, and we did not have sort of public support for it. We had lots of people thinking we were throwing money in the ocean and it wasn't a good idea, and all those kinds of things. We worked hard to try to get into the Word of budget and get a federal program. We got approved for that. We had the Corps design a program, and over the course of a couple of decades, it didn't matter which party was in control, we were never able to get the federal funding share of a federal project. We had the state share set up, and we had our local share set up through an occupancy tax, but we were never able to get the federal share. So finally, in the early 2000s, we decided that enough was enough, and we couldn't keep going the way we were going. In Dare County, there are five incorporated beach towns that all adjoin each other. They go, I don't know if you are familiar with Dare County, but from north to south, they go from Duck to Nag's Head. And then in the southern part of the county, which is Hatteras Island, if you look on the map, that's the part that sticks out. There are 7 unincorporated villages down there that are in the national park. And so we've got about 100 miles of beach in Dare County. Probably 60 miles of that is owned by the Park Service, and the rest of it is in these either incorporated or unincorporated areas. In the early 2000s, Nags Head decided they were going to do a project irrespective of the federal. They would, and met with us, and we went through a process of how to fund that project. And we have an occupancy tax that is 6 cents on the or 6 cents on the every occupant, every rental unit, and every hotel room, every occupancy in Dare County. And 2 cents of that occupancy tax is dedicated to beach nourishment, can be used for no other purpose, and that's by state statute. And that fund is managed by the county, by Dare County, us. In our negotiations and our discussions with Nags Head, kind of arbitrarily, or maybe because it's what they thought they could afford, but we came up with essentially a 50-50 split. And again, there was no magic in that. They were the only community at the time willing to go out on a limb and do nourishment in face of the public, what was perceived as the public opposition. And so they went forward, and we funded 50% of about a $35 million project in Nags Head. And that project was completed in 2010. It was completed the day before Hurricane Irene passed. And so on the morning after, we all got in a four-wheel drive, drove through the water over here in Manio, where my office is, and went to Nags Head. There's a pier, Jeanette's Pier is a state-owned pier with concrete pilings. It's really sturdy, and it will survive anything. And we went out on the pier to see what had happened to our beach in the hurricane, and it was still there. Everything was there. There was no water on the road on Highway 12, which parallels the beach. There was no structural damage to any of the cottages located in the nourishment area. There was a hotel there that no damage was it. Before nourishment, the ocean was undermining the edge, the corner of that hotel. After the hurricane, the water wasn't near the hotel. It was up high on the beach, but the beach was there. The dune was still there. And the project did exactly what everybody had hoped it did. It protected all the infrastructure, from the cottages to the highway to the water systems of all the things that run down Highway 12. And so it was a big success. In Dare County, Hurricane Irene was a very significant hurricane. It did a lot of damage. It did a lot of flooding down in those villages down to the south that weren't nourished at the time. It did a lot of flooding up in Kitty Hawk, which is in the northern area of the county, which was not nourished at the time. A lot of vegetation damage. It was a bad storm. It was one of the two bad ones Irene and Isabel are the two really bad ones that have occurred here since I've been here, and I've been here 40 years. So it was a bad storm, and that beach survived. The result of that was that all the other towns immediately said, how did we get into beach nourishment? And at that point, we had to figure out how were we going to do that. And so over the course of a couple of years, we have a manager's meeting. The town manager and I meet once a month for lunch every month. And we began meeting, and in those lunch meetings began talking about how are we going to fund that. We knew we weren't going to get federal funding. There is no state money in North Carolina. We don't have a state beach nourishment fund. And so anything that's been done here has had to be done with local dollars. And as we went up and down the coast, you probably don't know much about it, but up in Duck is sort of the high-end area. Their property tax base is high for our communities. Kitty Hawk is lower in the values of the properties there. It's more of a village, and the oceanfront properties are really old and not the newer large structures that we have like in Duck. So their property tax values are lower. When you look at Southern Shores, it's all residential, but the oceanfront is really nice and big, and so it had kind of medium property values. Go to Kill Level Hills, the other town, it is really big. It's got the highest population, and it has the highest tax base. And then Nags Head's, closer to Kill Level Hills, between Kill Level Hills and Duck. And so formulas where you try to do like 50% like we did in Nags Head didn't work. You could not have done a project in Kitty Hawk and asked them to pay 50% of the cost. Their tax base isn't large enough to support that. They couldn't tax high enough to recover what they would need to pay 50% of that cost. And so we had to find another way to do that. And after a lot of trial and error, we looked at Nags Head put in 15 or 17 million dollars of their money into that project. And so doing it 50% didn't work, doing it the cubic yard didn't work, doing it by the mile or the footage didn't work. So we looked at what did that $17 million look like to their tax base. If you divided that $17 million across their whole tax base, what would each lot or each resident have to pay to recover that? And the answer was around 27 cents. They didn't wind up doing it that way. They didn't take 27 cents from everybody in the county. They allocated it based on your proximity to the ocean front, under the logic that the closer you were to the ocean, the more benefit you got, and so the higher your share ought to be. And so they apportioned it among their taxpayers differently but that was the net effect. When we took that 27 cents and we translated that to Kitty Hawk, or we translated that to the other towns, that was a number they could all afford. And we had enough money in our fund to pay the difference. So we took that and we said, okay, Kitty Hawk, what does 27 cents do on your $15 million project? And it may not have gotten in but $2 million. Well, in that case, we put in the $13 million difference. In Duck, on their $20 million project, if it paid $15 million, then we only put in the other $5 million. So everybody didn't get an equal share of the money, but each town's tax base paid the same burden. And we were able to convince maybe not be the right word, but everybody understood the logic in that. And the taxpayers, if you paid, 20 cents in Nags Head to get beach nourishment, then you pay 20 cents in Duck to get beach nourishment. And so from that perspective, it was deemed to be fair among all the communities, and that's how we did it. We were lucky in the sense that our beach nourishment fund had enough money in it to pay for it that way, and so that's what we did. In allocating those funds, we had some actuaries come in, and we created a beach nourishment model. And in that model, we plugged in our revenue sources. We plugged in the dollars that we get from the occupancy tax. We plugged in the tax rates that we get from the towns. We plugged in what our consultants told us the costs were. We added inflationary factors into that over time. We added what we thought growth would be in our occupancy fund to try to model our revenue. And with each project, before we approved a new project, we made sure that, one, we had enough money to build the project, but two, that when we ran the model out into the future, that there was sufficient money there to do the maintenance that we had to do. And we did this on 5-year increments. And so every 5 years or thereabouts, these projects get renewed, maintained. Theoretically, it would cost less to do the maintenance than it did to do the original project. And we ran the models to be sure we had enough money to do it. We weren't going to do a project and then not have the money to do the maintenance because we thought that would be throwing the money away. So we did not do any new projects without having the model set up to where we could do the maintenance into the future, and that's how we added projects. And so working through all that, we had enough money over time that we did those 5 towns that are our incorporated towns. And so every incorporated town in Dare County now has a nourished beach and a project. Part of our other logic was from experience, what we found was that when we had storms or when we had beaches that were in disrepair, when the Weather Channel showed up, they didn't go to the beautiful, nourished beach that survived the storm. They went to the beach where the house fell in or where the dune was collapsing or whatever and said, oh my gosh, here's what's happened in Dare County. And that's a 1 mile stretch of, say, Kitty Hawk that wasn't nourished at the time. But that carried over to the whole county. People would see it on the news and think, oh my God, Dare County got destroyed. And so our leaders said it was important, no matter how we apportion the cost, that all of our beaches get nourished, because what's good for one is good for all. You know, a rising sea floats all ships, all those things, but it was beneficial for our tourist-based economy that we make sure that all of our beaches look nice and all of our beaches are the same. And so we had political buy-in as well. After the Nags Head project, I think there was an election that year. That was an even number year. All of our elected folks got reelected, and so we knew that the public supported it as well, even though probably going into it, that might not have been the case. And so our projects have worked well. Since those projects, we've had to go south to our unincorporated towns. Down there, we have to deal with the Park Service. There's some different rules and things we have to do down there. But those projects were more to protect Highway 12, which is our only access in and off that island. There's a bridge to the north of that island. There's a ferry to the south. And there's one road in and out that goes the length of that island. And every time we have a nor'easter, we had overwash that closed that road. And every time we had a hurricane, we had damage to the roads that closed that road, necessitating the use of an emergency ferry. Our bridges are taking, 10,000 cars a day. That emergency ferry would take 400 cars a day. And so it was a big bite to our economy, and we had to do something. So we started looking for ways to do nourishment down there to protect the road. The first project we did down there was with Buxton. We applied the same formula that we did with the towns. We ran the same model. The model worked, the formula worked, and we built that project. The second project we built down there was in the village of Avon for the same reason, to protect the highway. And once again, we ran the same formula. It worked. In that area, we taxed everybody in Avon. We taxed the ocean front and I think 3 back from the ocean at like 20 cents, and we taxed everybody who was west of that line 5 cents, for a total of 25 cent town-wide to cover that. And we've been doing that since we did that project. I think we're in about the 4th year of that or 5th year of that now. And so that's what we've done. Right now we have a beach in Rodanthe. You may have seen it in the news. It's been in the national news where we have some homes collapsing and we're struggling with ways to get them off the beach. We can't nourish to protect homes on Hatteras Island because it's in the park, and the Park Service won't allow that. You can only do nourishment to protect public infrastructure. So all of our nourishment is geared to protecting Highway 12, and the nourishment project ancillary benefit is the protection of those homes that are there and protection of that beach, which is part of the national park. And so we're working to do that now. We're working to get some grant dollars to do that. Our fund isn't large enough at the moment, hasn't grown enough to do that project. That tax base is really small, so we can get very little out of that tax base. Probably 90% of that project would have to be paid out of our fund, and maybe 10% out of the tax base. We don't have that kind of fund. The model won't work under the parameters I talked to you about earlier. And so we haven't done that project. We're working on it. Again, we've got a couple of grants with irons in the fire that we'll see what happens. Some resiliency grants that North Carolina has to provide. If we can get one of those grants to get the project built, then we have enough money in the fund with that to cover the maintenance. I guess the last thing I'll tell you is we leverage our dollars by borrowing the money. So if we've got a $20 million project, we go out in the market and we borrow $20 million for 5 years, which is the life of our project. And we repay that out of the fund so that we don't have to have $20 million in any one year. We have to have, $4 million a year to repay that $20 million over the 5-year term. And in that way, we can do more projects over time. We can leverage those dollars out over time. We can do 5 projects with $20 million in year 1 instead of just 1 if we leverage it out that way. And our model, as we've got it set up, tells us how much we can afford, gives us our coverage ratios on how much we have to save. As a part of our model, we keep in the fund 1 year's worth of debt service so that if we had a hurricane year and it wiped out our tourist season, we'd still have enough money to pay the debt service on that till we got recovered for the next tourism year. So we've got a pretty elaborate model. We have an employee who is our manager, he's our beach and inlet guy. We do a lot of dredging work around here for our inlets and our commercial fishermen. We have those lumped together. He manages all that, and that's his full-time job, to just keep all that in order, to keep all the money right, get all the permits in the right place and all that. And then we have another employee who works in our finance department who's a project manager who, once we bid the projects, we go out and he manages them on the ground. The other thing that we did that's unusual is a significant part of the cost to do a project is the mobilization of the dredges and the vessels and the things that need to get here. And so while Nags Head did their project as a standalone project, it was the model project. But when the 4 towns to the north did theirs, what we decided was, why not let Dare County bid all 4 projects as one project? And in that way, there'd only be one mobilization cost. And that way, we did not run the risk of having one company be the low bidder for one project and another be the low bidder for the other. And now you got 2 dredges out there fighting for the sand from the same spoil site. And it also saved all the towns money on the overall cost of the project because we could split that mobilization cost 4 ways. And the county agreed to do that. We agreed to do that with some indemnity agreements and all that kind of stuff. We've got a fairly elaborate MOU between us and the towns where we bid them, we handle the money, we write all the checks, we pay all the bills, we do all that stuff. And so on the surface, we're the contracting party and we do all those things. But the public relations, the specifications, dealing with the citizenry, all that stuff is delegated to the town. So if somebody calls complaining because the dredge pipe's in front of their rental cottage today, that call doesn't come to my public information office. It comes to the town public information office, and they deal with that taxpayer or that renter in their town. If the spec changes or the cost changes, then we have who takes that risk is in that MOU and those kind of things. And so we have all that worked out and agreed upon. So we're just the bank and the pass-through and the contracting party, but all the day-to-day work is done by the towns under that MOU. So that's how we've done it. We've been working for a number of years trying to get the state to create some type of beach nourishment fund for the whole state. There are other beaches in our state that need nourishment. Carteret County has a similar program, and all of their beaches are nourished. The Hanover County has a similar program. They have a federally funded beach in the Hanover County, so they're in a little bit better shape. And then Brunswick County, the southernmost of our counties, has a similar plan that they do. Onslow County has one thing. They're struggling. They don't really have a plan. Their county doesn't support their beach very much because it's a very small beach and it's not a significant part of their tax base. And they aren't large enough to do it on their own, and so they struggle with how they're going to do it. and I don't know where they are, but they're struggling with that. But that's sort of the shorthand summary of beach nourishment in Dare County and North Carolina. And I don't know if that helps you any or not, but I'll tell you one last thing that I didn't mention. The taxes that the towns create are done pursuant to a service district. In North Carolina, the statutes, a town has the right to create a municipal service district to perform certain municipal functions only in a designated part of the town. So you can do it for water, you can do it for sidewalks, you can do it for various things. And beach nourishment is one of the listed things in the statute that you can create a service district. So you can create a circle around some part of your town that benefits from whatever you want to do, and you can add a layer of tax on top of that above the ad valorem tax, and that's what they've all done. And so the guy on the oceanfront is paying the regular ad valorem tax of 15 cents that everybody in town pays for all the municipal services. And then on top of that, he might be paying 15 or 20% more for the beach nourishment tax that the guy on the soundfront doesn't pay because he's not in the service district, because he's not getting the benefit of that. And you can allocate that benefit. And so, I'll use Avon for us. Avon pays their normal 40 cents is our county tax rate, their 40-cent tax rate. On the oceanfront, on top of that, they pay 20 cents. There's a circle around the oceanfront for that municipal service district that pays 20 cents on top of the 40. And then there's a circle around the rest of the community for 5 cents, because the rest of the community benefited as well, because the purpose was to keep Highway 12 open so that we could provide public services. And so there was logic to make them pay something towards that beach nourishment tax. And so they pay 5 cents. And so each of the towns can decide where the benefit line is, who gets what, and then how to allocate that tax in their municipal service district. And that may be something that's unique to North Carolina, but again, it is a statutory provision that we have that was given to all the towns in North Carolina and the counties by the legislature, and we've used that to help us as well.
Hey, Bobby, real quick, thank you for running through that. How long did it take you to put this foundationally in place? I mean, it's a lot of agreements, a lot of MOUs, funding structure. How long did it take you all to do that?
The hardest part was coming to trying to find a way that was fair, that each town could accept, where it didn't appear that one town was subsidizing the other town with their tax base. And that took a lot of effort, mainly by me and by my finance officer, trying to find ways to fairly allocate our dollars. Once we got past that and that idea that the tax base was paying the same thing and everybody accepted that, then putting together the MOUs and doing all that wasn't really that hard, because we were all on the same page and everybody acknowledged what we were doing. And so, that wasn't hard. Doing the funding part wasn't hard. Borrowing the money, we're used to doing that. We've done that before. And so, we had a team on board already to do all that. So, the permitting took some time with the first permits, although when we did the projects down in Buxton, it was taking us 3 years or thereabouts, or 4 years to get a permit. We really didn't think we could wait that long. And we went to the Park Service and the permitting people and said, if we pay you, will you hire a permitting official to work for you to review our permits as soon as they get them and not put them in the bottom of the pile? And they agreed to do that, and we paid them, I think, $65,000 to bring in somebody that worked only on our permits, and we got them in 18 months. And so, we did some things that were unique to speed it up, but again, getting the funding right and then getting the permits were the two time-consuming things.
Yeah, I think our state legislators have gone to the same schools as North Carolina's. We have no funding source in South Carolina either, and have been talking about it for years, but nothing's there.
I have a question, Bobby. Is the only option for these local municipalities to come up with their 50% or 30%, whatever their share is of the project, is their only option the municipal service district and getting it from the tax base, or do they have the ability to implement another accommodation tax at the local level for
No.
their share?
So we have three sources of funds that we can get money from. We can get them from our ad valorem tax base. We get it from sales tax. There's 2 or 3 statutes that deal with how sales taxes are split, but we get sales taxes and we get occupancy taxes. And the sales taxes and the occupancy taxes are set by the legislature, and the ad valorem tax is set by the local government. And so the local government can do the municipal service district and just tax a part of their community, or theoretically they could take what they needed and raise their ad valorem tax to everybody in their town to get what they need for their share. Either way, they could do it. The sales tax is set. They get what they get from the state, and there's no changing that. We had at one time a 1-cent sales tax designated for beach nourishment, and it was before the Nags Head project, and we were able to get that through the legislature because the president pro tem of the legislature was a Dare County resident. There was a recall petition done and a vote, and that got voted out, and so we lost that tax before everybody knew it was going to be successful. And then our guy retired, and so we don't have that clout in the legislature to get it back anymore. The occupancy tax is set by the legislature as well. Our total occupancy tax is 6 cents, and that's the sort of the deal that's been worked between the legislature and the North Carolina tourism lobby. The tourism lobby is opposed to any more raises in the tourism and the occupancy tax. If they don't think they should pay the burden of all the services and da-da-da-da. But the detente that has been reached between them and the legislature is 6 cents, and any efforts to get 7 cents is sort of dead on arrival because they're a pretty powerful lobby in our state. And so nobody has been able to move that. There was movement one time to raise it to try to pay for schools, and there was one time to pay for other kinds of infrastructure by various parts of the state, and they got nowhere. So we're locked into that, and that 2 cents we get for beach nourishment is locked into that as well. We can't change that.
Another question, Mayor, if I may. In places like Rodante, where they are not able to generate enough to cover their local share for their project, does the town or the county participate in any short-term or emergency solutions to try to mitigate additional damage to those properties until a project is executed and implemented?
To like an individual property owner?
Or in an area that is sustaining damage? Does the city or the county?
So if the town, if one of the towns had a problem, we had a storm and it created a problem in that town or in one of the villages that was unique to that village, then our philosophy, as I said before, is that beach nourishment fund there is there to fund beautiful beaches in Dare County to enhance our tourism economy, because that's all we are. We're a one-legged stool, if you will. We don't have anything else.
Ouch.
And so we're committed to doing that. And if they had a problem, we would have no problem using the fund to help solve that problem if the fund could afford it based on the parameters that I did. But we would not take money out of the fund to help an emergency to the detriment of the next round of maintenance projects that we needed to do to keep the overall beaches clean. and nourished. And so it'd really be a function of what could the fund afford, what's on the table. We put some money in to do sand fencing. We put some money in out of the fund to remove a house that's dilapidated on a beach or something. We've done some things that are a few $100,000 out of a $20 million fund that don't significantly impact the long-term model and the long-term things. But if someone came in and needed to do, a $5 million emergency thing, that would impact us, and we'd have to run the model and see, is there enough capacity in the model to do what's programmed, what's in the hopper to be programmed, and then add this to it. And if it would add to it and we could do all those things, we would. If not, we would not.
Hey, Scott, you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple, just so I understand. You've got two revenue streams, the 2 cents plus the tax, you guys have progressive tax from the farm to the beach, sort of to the rest of the county. Is that correct, Bobby?
Correct.
Do you find that your maintenance program, does that mitigate your instance of emergencies, because you've got this 5-year rotating, looks like a proactive maintenance program and renourishment program? Do you see a lot of emergency situations, or do you think this might have helped kind of mitigate those instances?
If you take our overall projects as a whole, I would say yes, it has mitigated that, and we don't have a lot of emergencies. If I'll just go back to Nags Head. Nags Head, I was talking to them last week. They think they're now going to get 7 years out of their project. They think it's going to last a little bit longer than what they anticipated. And so that's good news for the fund, because we don't have to come out of the fund, and it can grow another couple of years, and that helps. Duck is like right on target. Kill Level Hills is right on target. So they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing. When we go down south, we have 2 projects down there. One of them is doing what it's supposed to be doing. The other one is probably deteriorating faster than we anticipated, and it likely will not last until the 5-year term. We will have probably lost everything that we put in there, and maybe some more by the time of 5 years. For whatever reason, it's just eroding faster, or we've had more storms, or they've been more intense, or whatever, but it's eroding faster than was anticipated. I don't know what we're going to do there, because right now the fund can't, we're not there yet, but the fund can't cover that. There's some sandbagging rules and some things here that the private property owner can do. And so likely what will happen there is they'll do whatever they can do to hold the ocean out for a year or 2 years until the cycle comes back to them, and then we'll build that beach back and hope we don't have as many storms and it'll last again. But so not all of them have worked, but for the most part it has. You're talking about a mile, or you're talking about 2 miles out of probably 30 or 30 miles of beaches that we've done.
Yeah. Can I just ask one more question? We've got a beach renourishment fund as well, but I think we're dealing with the headwinds of also inflation. You mentioned that $35 million project back in 2010. Are you guys also seeing that the costs are escalating pretty dramatically for these projects?
No, they've come in. We just finished all the projects last year. We did every project last year. Last spring, we finished everything in Dare County, and they all came in right on budget. So we were satisfied with that. The way you bid them makes a big difference. We sort of give a 2-year window. If we were going to bid right now for a project this spring, we could get a bid price for that. But if we told them they could do it in the spring of 26, we've done that. There was probably $12 million or more difference between a spring of 25 project that was bid now and a spring of 26 project that was bid now. And so there's a big chunk there. And so we give a pretty wide window to allow the contractor to organize all his projects with the hope that we can get the best value, because we're not putting him in a bind, or he's not giving up another big dollar project or whatever. to work around us. And so we've gotten pretty good pricing, and it's stayed, so far, it's stayed within our models.
Elizabeth?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I had one point of clarification just for my mind, but I think I understand it you to have said that Dare County is a county comprised of islands. I mean, you're all kind of in it together. There is no mainland that's part of your county, so you all are on that riding
Yeah,
that one
we
stream.
have a mainland. 90% of Dare County is owned by either the state or the federal government. The mainland, for the most part, is a wildlife refuge. There's a couple of fishing villages that are small, that have a few hundred people that live in them, but there is no mainland. We have one industry. We have a boat building industry, a charter boat that builds high-end charter vessels. You know, if you Google Bayless yachts, they're big time. But in the scheme of our total economy, it's not a significant part of it. We have a $1.2 billion economy, and they don't come anywhere near being a big fraction of that. And our other, I guess, industry here is seafood. Dare County brings in about 75% of all the seafood that's brought into North Carolina. But again, as important as that is to us, it's not a significant part of that $1.2 billion. I mean, that is almost entirely tourism-based.
Got it. And so you mentioned also earlier that Highway 12 runs the length of your county. And that's
Correct.
what, since 90% is owned by the state, and I think I understood you to say that you can't protect private property. It's what allows you to have this program and justifies it is the protection of the highway, or I was.
What allows us to do it is our tax base is big. If our last revaluation, our tax base was 18 billion. My tax assessor tells me that we're going to do reval in 25, and then we're going to be approaching $22 billion tax base in 25.
Okay.
And so we have a big tax base, which means, you know, a penny of revenue on our current tax base generates about $1.8 million.
Okay.
And
Thank
so,
you.
as you can see, when you start adding 10 or 20 cents of that, we can generate a significant amount of money because our tax base is so strong.
Okay. And you mentioned in passing that
I can't hardly hear you.
I'm sorry. Well, when you mentioned also that the sand, I think that you said the sand you get, you mentioned a spoil area. Is your sand coming from sites that are specific and kind of renourish themselves by dredging efforts? Or are you going offshore and locating sand?
We're going offshore.
Okay.
We have spoil sites that we've used for the projects that we've done already. Those spoil sites on the northern beaches have at least one more cycle left in them. And we just had our consultants go out this year to find future spoil sites and to try to give us some estimate of how long. We had a geologist who wasn't in favor of beach nourishment tell us one time that beach nourishment works very well, and it'll continue to work as long as you have enough money and enough sand. And so what we wanted to be sure is to see how much sand that we had. And what we found is that we have spoil sites that will get us at least to the next 35 years. And so we're comfortable that we've got the sand available for the projects that we need. And if dollars continue to do what we project, then we've got the money to do that, and we're in good shape.
So those are
But all of
spoil.
our sand is offshore dredged material.
Okay, I guess that's where I'm getting confused. Because offshore, at least here, our dredging is coming from, our dredge or spoil material comes from the dredging of the intercoastal waterway, as opposed to the offsite. Okay, yours is,
Our intercoastal waterway isn't near us. It's
Right.
further inland, and it's not. And then we have inlets that we do dredge,
Got
but
it.
our inlets are too far away from our beaches to get the sand economically to the beach areas. And at least in the past, it hasn't been compatible sand. So we haven't really been able to tap into that source. It'd be nice if we could, but we haven't been able to.
But
So it's all offshore. Some of it's within state waters, and some of it we have to go to BOEM and get BOEM leases to get as well.
Yeah, our last two renourishment projects have been offshore dredges, as well.
I'm sorry.
Our last two projects have been offshore dredges.
Yeah.
We are working with the Army Corps of Engineers on a project on one end of the island using beach-compatible sand from a sediment area from when the Corps dredged the intercoastal their last time. So this is going to be the first time that we do a project that there's a nourishment type project using that sand rather than taking it offshore, which is what we've done in the past.
We looked at that as well. In Avon, there is a spoil site in Avon onshore that could be trucked. We looked at that, but when we compared the cost, it was cheaper for us to do the dredge project, and we didn't do that. But we know it's there. I mean, it's in the future, who knows? Our biggest problem with trying to truck it in is that we're fairly remote. We're not close to anything. So to get somewhere where close enough that you could truck it economically, there's just not anywhere. You're talking about having to truck it, 100 miles or something, and that would be really expensive at those volumes.
Other questions from the committee?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Tim?
I researched or looked up your beach inlet management plan, and that was back in 2016 for the update. Did you use that as your base for your program to get funding for the beach renourishment? Because a lot of things.
Is that the state bill?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a North Carolina beach and inlet management plan.
No, that was done as a part of our effort to get the state to add a funding mechanism. It was done to try to show them, here's what's needed. We're actually working to try to get them to do an update right now to tell us, here's what your beaches bring, here's what they need, here's what the cost over time is, and if the state's going to contribute, here's what that share, needs to be at whatever percent you want to pick. And that's what it is. Our costing and all our stuff was done by us, by our consultants and all that, and we didn't really use that at all.
Okay.
Have you gotten any state money, Bobby, over the years?
I'm sorry?
Have you gotten any state money?
The only sort we've had money from two sources other than what we've talked about, and it's sporadic. One is out of the blue, every now and then the state will have some resiliency money available, and they have some now that we're trying to get. And we were able to get, $1.2 million, $1.7 million, and that's, talk about $1 million like it's nothing, and that's a whole pile of money. But in the scope of a beach nourishment project, you can't do anything with that. $1 million doesn't get you anywhere. So it was nice to get it. It was nice to put it in the fund. We got lucky because each of the towns got it as well. And so we got nearly $10 million between us and the towns. And we kind of said, okay, town, rather than you reducing your tax rate because you just got $1.7 million, we're going to cut our share that we're giving you by that $1.7 million and put all 10 million of it in the fund for the future. And you can hold your tax rate the same and no harm, no foul on your end. But the overall picture of our fund is better. And that's what they did. And we did, and they were okay with that. So, so that helped us. But it's very sporadic. And the only other time we get outside money is in a nourished project. If you have a named storm or a declared storm, then the beach is treated as infrastructure, and whatever you lose during that storm, you can get FEMA money to replace that. And we've done some interim emergency projects that you talked about using that FEMA money between our normal, nourishment times.
Gotcha. Scott, one last one.
Yeah, Bobby, you talked about your modeling and that you don't, you kind of go through a whole total cost of the life of the project from the original nourishment to maintenance program over the projected 5 years or so. Can you tell us a little bit about what's involved in your maintenance program? And I don't know if you have any kind of, measurement or kind of litmus test on, is the project 60% of the cost and the maintenance 40% of the cost to get you to the next one? Or how do you allocate those costs or kind of come up with those balances over the life of a project?
So we use the word maintenance, but maintenance is simply another beach nourishment project. The idea is that when you have a beach that's degraded, you come in and you say, how much beach do you want to have here all the time? And if you want to have 200 feet of beach, you take the beach that you got and you add whatever you got to add to it, so now you have 200 feet of beach. You then take your erosion rate and say over 5 years, how much erosion, how many cubic yards of erosion am I going to get? And you add that to your 200. And if you're right, then at the end of 5 years, you're going to have 200 feet of beach because you fed the ocean the erosion rate that you put out there as well. And you come back and do it again, and it's going to be cheaper because you don't have to build the 200 feet that you're trying to hold. That's the theory behind it. It doesn't always work exactly like that, and it's not an exact percent because it may erode faster or slower. But on the whole, across all of our projects, that kind of formula has worked, and we've had enough money to do what would this coming one in 3 years will be, or 4 years will be our third go of it.
Thank you.
Bobby, thank you for your time. This was very helpful, very appreciative.
You're welcome. I don't know if I've helped you any, but I'm glad to share what we know. And if you have other questions down the road, please feel free to give me a call.
All right, thank you. We're going to do a little bit of committee work, so have a good weekend.
Thank
You too.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Desiree, thank you all for chasing him down. That was interesting.
Very much.
Yeah.
Super helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very
he-
good.
He
So,
came over he spoke to the Beach Advocates meeting a couple of years ago when we held it here. So it's been a very interesting model to look at and really to learn a lot. So it's been very helpful for us as well.
yeah, different situation, but the same.
It's,
The way
you
their
know,
county is set up and,
The
yeah.
It's at the
scale of
county
it.
level.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
the sheer numbers and size of the county compared to the size of our municipality creates some challenges, I think. But listening to what he says and how he creates the revenue, we just don't have that same base, right? He's talking about his tax base being so much larger.
He's
Like
got
how-
bigger beaches, a lot more shoreline than we
Yeah.
do.
Well, he's got
100
40,
miles.
of the 100 miles though, he's got 40.
That
The
there.
60
But we
belong to
have-
the National Park Service.
We have
So
4.
scale that down a
Five
bit,
and a half.
spread it across 5 incorporated towns. So you really have 40 divided by 5, that's 8 miles. Well, we have a 7-mile beach, right? So when you think about the scale of that, each municipality is about the same of the incorporated towns when you start looking at that. When you start breaking down the numbers. Because he's not managing 100 miles of beach, even though that's in his county.
Right.
But one thing, I know we're very different,
Mike,
but
yeah.
what we're not, the creativity I saw in what he's doing, I think is what we need to
Absolutely.
be looking first at what our goals are, and then starting to look at the creative ways, both funding. And, we have our sister barrier islands in the county, and whether or not there's a way to leverage the fact that many of us are in a very similar situation. And as he pointed out, it changes. One island, like ours right now, is in worse shape than, say, another. But again, if we can somehow leverage some of these costs looking forward, but I think we've got to come up with our initial goals, et cetera, and then that would be some creative thought as to whether we can carve out something in the county within those islands.
Yeah. Well, and you've got Folly, that is a federally managed
Right, we
beach.
have a different situation at
But-
Folly,
but you
and
do have
then
other-
different tax bases, but again, they dealt with a lot of that situation, so.
But yeah, absolutely. There's a way to
There's
pull
a way to
resources.
do it.
Yeah.
And like you said, how he manages is the leveraging the equipment being in place and going hit them all up at the same time or set a schedule. So it's
Or-
guaranteed work for a contractor and it changes the pricing of the
Right.
schedule.
And the idea that he's hired, they've looked at employees, whether there's an employee that is shared amongst many of us who is just working on beach management for 2 or 3 or more of these barrier islands it's this, if the goals are similarly situated, then that may, the cost sharing could go beyond just the management itself, but the administration of management over, the life cycle of these islands.
I thought it was very interesting that they offered to pay the permitting agencies for a person to just review their permits, and even that was 18 months.
Still took
but
18 months. yeah.
But it shows the urgency and the challenges that I think at a state level we have with just getting permits in place.
But again, and the creativity that we need
Yeah.
we need to be looking out of the box. If we get against a wall, what can we do to get through it?
I didn't ask this question of him, and I wish I had now, but I'm assuming, probably incorrectly, that all of Dare County is, to the extent that it's the 40 miles, is publicly accessible. Because you think about Charleston County beaches, it's us, Sullivan's, and Edisto, effectively, that are public. Kiowa has a stretch because of the because of the beachfront park. Seabrook is private. I mean, is that, we're almost, even within the different municipalities, we have different access levels that also put triggers, but there's a path here. We just have to find it.
Yeah.
We should definitely, obviously, our sister island, be working with, considering working with them. I mean, if nothing else.
So what's next? It's 10 o'clock, and some of our last ideas were bringing in Explore Charleston, talking about a lobbyist effort. We could bring in our lobbyist, just kind of get an update from them as well.
I'm also wondering at
Corps.
this point if we don't need somebody from the county.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know I was trying to look up the county budget while he was talking, and I don't know, because, they get accommodations taxes at a county level. Of course, we don't all have a beach, which is the challenge too. We're not all a bunch of barrier islands here in Charleston County.
Yeah. Scott?
Yeah, just a suggestion. Bobby threw a lot of really good ideas, I think, at us today of kind of structurally and how to manage the projects and how to get in front of it. I mean, I'd like an opportunity to maybe digest it and rewatch this again once or twice. And maybe we come back and kind of brainstorm on some further ideas that maybe, I think, Elizabeth, to your point, and to others, about what is achievable for our municipality, given the fact that our mix of the tax base and all are a little different. And is there a way to enlist some county support? Because that tax base is certainly a lot larger than what we have by ourselves, and it seems like they've cracked the nut of not going it alone. And maybe there's a way that we can explore those kinds of opportunities, because we are a public beach, and maybe there are ways we can enlist other help besides the traditional state and FEMA funds.
Yeah, and I don't want to get stuck on one item. I mean, I think we need to concurrently be looking at different things, whether it's a lobbying effort, Army Corps project, taking over. I think there are other things we can be looking at. I'm with you, Scott. There was a lot to take away from, a lot of good to take away from Bobby today, for sure. But I'm really just, if we want to have something next week or skip a week or whatever you want to do, just trying to line up whatever you guys want for the next go round.
Like you said, definitely want to hear from the Army Corps engineer. What does a Army Corps managed beach look like? What's that funding look like? What's the control that we do or don't have over or partnering with them for that?
Yeah.
So we can evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of that.
And I reached out to them this morning, so we'll see what their timing is. But they're definitely on the list, for sure.
I mean, maybe our county council representative. I mean, we have somebody for this district that's sitting on county council. I don't know. Hate to do that to them, but just a thought.
Is there a Bobby counterpart that we could, I agree with Andrew, by the way, and maybe there's a county counterpart that we could talk to, just even get it on their radar or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's a grand idea. I'd love to have a little feet to the fire from our county personally.
Well, Mayor and I have been invited to a meeting with a new chairman of county council in the next, I believe it's the next week or so we can bring this issue up and just get some support and hopefully get somebody to attend a meeting. And just, I think part of the education piece, and you heard it from Bobby, and a lot of the effort was trying to convince and make people understand how important it is to allocate funds for a healthy beach. And our beach not only serves Isle of Palms, it serves the entire county. It serves the tri-county area. So I think there's a little bit of education of understanding us having a healthy beach not only benefits our infrastructure and our community, but the entire Tri-County area as well. And how can we leverage some of the resources that they may want to allocate to that to make it be the case for a long time.
Yeah, and I had reached out to our county rep Monday or Tuesday this week on an unrelated item. Today's only Friday, so I haven't heard back yet. So we'll see.
I think that the biggest takeaway from me from hearing about Dare County is whether we like it or not, it seems like relying on federal funding and state funding is going to be a challenge. And how do we creatively leverage the resources that are available to us to make sure that we have a sustainable plan moving forward?
I thought the bond issue was an interesting.
Yeah, bonding.
I mean, because, you know, we pay for everything like that out here. Our new fire stations, the rec center, you know, that's how a municipality of this size handles projects of that scope. I imagine our new city hall may be the same. So, you know.
And that was very interesting to hear how he said, once we fund it or we fund it through the bonding, we just accept that whatever happens to that beach is what's going to happen. Like there's some emergency, but it's just like, hey, when the next cycle comes, that's when it comes. And we have to have buy-in from everybody that they have to be accepting of this is the model and the structure. There's certain things you can't control because otherwise it's just not going to be sustainable or we're not going to meet expectations of our fellow residents.
Yeah,
And
and
that's the biggest thing is defining those expectations of what these projects and how this funding can actually help us or hurt us.
He spoke about, you know, one of the projects, we've spoken to him in a little bit more detail. They finished a project end of 2022, an $20 million project in one of the local communities, and they had a couple nor'easters after that, and they don't have any sand left, and they can't really do anything until the next cycle, unless something different happens. But you're kind of on their own at this point.
Or sandbagging.
Or sandbagging.
Holding the line the best they can.
So, I was just say, one of the things I think we're going to need to move forward with conversations with the county or even with the constituents, our neighbors, is going to be getting a general idea of what this project would cost on a, you know, what is our year? Is it 5 years, 7 years, 3 years? Maintenance, and knowing what that big number is, and then we would know, well, here's what we need on a 5-year, if let's say loan, back it off, what do we need per year, and then we can have some real conversations and say we are able to, based on what we currently have, bring in $1.5 million through an accommodation tax. What we are looking for now is to
Supplement it by
X to the people who, you know, are using it, enjoying it. And, you know, we can't, as a small island, we don't have that sort of revenue source. And we're willing to look at creative solutions, but we need the help of, you know. So I think knowing those numbers, I know they'll be general. And then also, it'll also give us some bang if we were to go then to a sister island and say, right now what we know is it's going to cost us $36 million every 5 years, making numbers up. But we feel confident that if you and us work together, that we're both going to be able to bring that number down. You know, have you looked at the number and maybe start encouraging those sorts of communications? But I do think that having a grasp on that number gives us something tangible to talk about.
Almost
That
like-
could, you know,
I agree.
We almost want to create a costing, like what per linear mile of the beach it costs X dollars, and then figure out what the other needs are, and then figure out. I see
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying.
I agree. I think that we have to identify first what is our expectation, what we want our beaches to look like, and then from that have a dollar amount and how do we crack that nut. That would make a much more fruitful conversation, I think, than just, hey, can you help us when we need help?
when we need help,
Yeah.
right? It's-
And it's more sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Because then
Yeah.
you're predicting as much as you can, recognizing that we can't predict the weather and the amount of storms we're going to get in a year.
Yeah.
Maybe we get lucky for a couple of years.
Yeah.
No.
Scott,
Oh, you're
Oh,
muted.
still muted.
You muted yourself again.
there you go.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was pretty stunning when he said that the difference between being able to plan out a project and then not plan out a project, the two bids were $12 million apart. I thought
Yeah.
that was
Isn't that
pretty,
amazing?
Yeah.
pretty telling. Yeah. So I agree with Cindy, that I think if we can kind of, get in front of it and get kind of what the numbers look like over a long period of time, we might have some more leverage to Andrew's point as well about the procurement.
It
And
also,
then setting up a plan.
Right.
Then, Scott, you're 100% right. If we can have a plan too, to ways, we can start reducing that cost. But if we, what is the maximum this is gonna cost, and then finding ways to not only fund it, but reduce it.
yeah, and I think part of that, and I know we're gonna wrap it up, but I think
Yep.
part of that too is we talk about our sister islands, but I'm not certain Sullivan's even has, they do not, their policy is not, I mean, they're growing.
They don't
I
have
mean,
the
there
need.
could be,
Yeah.
there will be communities, I mean, we might have to skip all the way up the coast to Edisto before we get to anybody that's even willing to have this discussion, because they're just not in the same boat that we're in.
Yeah.
Well-
And I think that Dare County, it sounded like all of them are, they're way out there. I think
Yeah.
they're all probably eroding at a fairly similar rate, and so the buy-in from everybody there makes more sense than it might here. I'm hoping that people see the need and the
Broader
necessity
picture.
for
Yeah.
the bigger picture, but, I'm not.
Can I piggyback off that real quick before we close out? Is that maybe we need to look outside of even our own county. If we look towards Georgetown, towards Pawleys, Litchfield, those places, there might be a need there, and there are smaller municipalities that might mimic us a little bit better to find a partnership, at least is within geographically reasonable, right? Like,
Yeah. To make it beneficial for
to make it beneficial for them,
contractor.
for both of us.
Well, we have
yeah.
Dewey's Island is struggling with beach erosion pretty significantly. There are some hotspots in Sullivan's Island that are experiencing erosion, so it may be at a smaller scale. But I think it's certainly a very creative solution to try to minimize the mobilization cost, which is usually the highest piece of those projects.
I mean, cast a large net, right? You
Yeah.
might catch more shrimp.
And again, apportionment of any employees or whatever that it takes, whether Sullivan's paying 10% of someone's salary and they're paying 5%, it's still,
Something.
Still 10%.
Something.
and we have buy-in. I mean, it's a community project.
Yeah.
So as far as next steps, sounds like Army Corps is definitely top of the list, so we can hear back from them to see if you're okay. Can we just kind of, Scott, to your point, maybe go away and digest this for a week, see what the Army Corps comes back with. Maybe we skip next week's meeting, and hopefully Army Corps would be ready 2 weeks from today, and just go from there. Is that fair, or are there other?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean,
Sounds good.
I'd say that's good unless
Or the
we want to
county
get
guy.
together just to kind of brainstorm alone, because we've
Certainly
taken
can.
in a lot over the last,
Yeah.
and maybe put together, maybe not be a full hour, but those who can be here, and I'm not sure I can, I get.
All the rest of you can get
All
together.
the rest of
and
you can
figure
get
out
in a
your
room together and outline our agenda.
Keep the momentum.
But we've had really good meetings, thank you.
Yeah, I think so,
For all
too.
you've done to set them up, and maybe just touch base next week with the idea of the Army Corps of, okay, here's what we've learned, and what are some of the things we
Okay.
wanna,
Well, let's keep next week, and
is that okay?
If we can get the Army Corps here next week, we'll schedule it, but if not, we'll plan on still having a meeting
just kind
and
of a planning session.
a planning
Yeah.
session
next step.
discussion.
Or just, just to, we've all got a lot of thoughts, I'm sure, from what we've heard a lot.
Yeah, it's been a great, thank
This
y'all,
was
Desiree.
super,
Sure.
Yeah.
super good, as of all the
Good.
rest.
Very good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, a good reference is the North Carolina Beach and Inlet Management Plan. It outlines what he had done on their beach, but this was their wish list. And so it kind of outlines what they wanted to do, and it was a study done by North Carolina, and there's a lot of good information on it.
Sarah, can you,
Tim, can you
process the-
distribute that for us?
yeah,
if
the
you've got it?
website, or,
I can share it. I can
you
share
share
that,
with
and I'll share too their equivalent of the Beachfront Management Act for North Carolina. I'll share those two documents, and maybe the next week we can digest that. And
that'd be really helpful.
sure, I'll do that today.
Because they did all the studies on the single source for funding with all the sales tax and the seasonal sales tax and meal tax. But one of the things is reallocating money from the accommodations tax. Instead of going to advertisement so much, maybe we are allocating that back into renourishment. So it's just another source of funding. So it's just an idea. But it's a pretty good read.
I would love to look at it, thank you.
And
One more, brief. I know council is headed towards a budget cycle. I mean, I hope that from the administrative section, we're gonna see where all of our options are for funding and what we could possibly funnel out of something straight into beach renourishment, because we have options with these different accommodations taxes, and I think even our hospitality and think, what kind of money are we talking about if everybody else just tells us to go,
Pound
away?
sand, pound
Yes,
sand.
I didn't want to say it.
All right, 10:12, we are off the record. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
That was quick for me.